Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 414. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 414. And this is going to be a unique episode because it's not really with Phil Zito. Yes, Phil Zito's in the intro and the extra of the podcast, but this is actually a podcast led by Julian Palacios, who's our director of sales and business development, and he is interviewing Abby Massey with Calvetti Ferguson. Now, I'm really excited. You can't really tell probably, but I'm getting goosebumps just like thinking about what you're about to hear. I've been kind of screaming from the mountaintops about 179 Delta and how much the change in the Inflation Reduction Act to 179 Delta is going to impact our market. And this is even more important now that we're having, regional banks collapse. We're starting to see capital potentially drying up in consequence of that. So how are we going to meet sustainability goals and mandates that are being pressed upon by society as well as by regulatory agencies in our buildings? Also, how are we going to modernize our buildings so that they can operate at peak efficiency, because we are losing people, and in order to be more effective, we need to go and have buildings that are smarter so that less people or lesser trained people can actually go and run these buildings. What does any of that have to do with the tax deduction? Well, as you will see in this episode, this tax deduction has some significant impacts to the cost of projects through allowing nonprofits and other organizations to pass the tax deduction on to for-profit businesses. In my opinion, this is going to be a huge game changer to the retrofit market, and I hope that you're able to hear that as you move through this episode. So with that being said, let's dive into the episode.
Welcome to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. My name's Julian Palacios. I'm Director of Business Development and Sales for Smart Buildings Academy, and I'm your host on today's podcast episode. We're excited to be here with all of you. On today's episode, we're going to cover everyone's favorite topic, taxes. Specifically, changes in tax code section 179D that will impact those of us in this industry. Now, to help me with all of this and to help me help you, I have Abby Massey from Calvetti Ferguson here with me as a guest. Welcome to the podcast, Abby.
Thanks, Julian. I'm glad to be here.
So let's get started with just getting to know you a little bit, and we'll start simple. So what's your role at Calvetti Ferguson and how'd you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a director of our tax incentives group at Calvetti Ferguson. I've been there for about a year. Prior to that, though, I was leading a very large Section 179D team for about 7 years. I was a part of these tax incentives. So I've been in and around these tax incentives for quite a while. But before then, I actually, my background is not as a CPA, but I am a professional engineer. I used to do building design. So my degree is from Purdue University. I have a bachelor's of science in civil with a concentration in structures. So I've been around the building industry for quite a while.
That's fantastic. And engineer turned tax expert, kind of a bit of a unicorn, right? You don't find people like you all the time.
That's right. If someone would have told me graduating out of college that I'd end up at a CPA firm, I probably would have laughed at them.
That's so funny. And how about outside of work? So a little bit of your professional background, but who are you in real life?
Yeah, so I live in Houston, Texas. I've been here for about 8 years. I think you've been to Houston. It's a huge food city. So I love trying new foods. I travel quite a bit. Last year, I had a goal of going to 20 concerts. I didn't quite hit that, but I really enjoyed trying to. One of my favorite trips/concerts I went to was actually in Hyde Park in London. I went to see the Rolling Stones. So it was very cool.
Oh, that sounds sick. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. Do music festivals count as one or many concerts?
For my purposes, I think many, as long as you're like actually attending and seeing somebody.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's paint a picture for the audience here. So how did we wind up here together on this podcast? We just met a couple weeks ago at an AHR.
Yes.
down in Atlanta. You stopped by the booth. So what's the backstory?
Yeah, so I went to AHR on the recommendation of a few clients that I work with who said, you've got to go. There are so many folks in the industry who are going to be there, people to meet. So that's exactly why I went. I was hoping to meet all sorts of folks, organizations, engineers, contractors, anyone who would be interested to know more about Section 179D. And so I did a little research and I saw Phil post about Smart Buildings Academy on LinkedIn. I saw that he was trying to network via LinkedIn about around the conference. So I stopped by the booth. Really, I was just checking in to see if you guys knew anything about maybe some of the apprenticeship programs. And you and I, Julian, got to talking and you said it would be great for us to collaborate on the 179D.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something our customers have been talking about, asking questions. Phil's been doing research like crazy on it. So
Yeah,
yeah, hopefully we can educate some folks today, or you can educate me because I'm clueless.
absolutely. I'm excited.
All right, well, let's jump into it.
Mhm.
And keep it simple for me. Like I said, I'm not a tax expert. What is Section 179D of the tax code?
Sure. So Section 179D is the energy efficient commercial buildings deduction. So in layman's terms, it's for any sort of projects on commercial buildings that impact one of three systems: the HVAC and hot water, the interior lighting, and the building envelope. So roofs, walls, windows, any sorts of projects that impact those systems can potentially receive this tax deduction.
Okay, awesome. And I'm guessing it's a big deal now because of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and something changed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there were a couple of changes centered around Section 179D, but I think what's most relevant is the value add. So originally, Section 179D, you could receive up to $1.80 per square foot of your facility if it met certain energy efficient thresholds. Now, the maximum value you can achieve is $5 per square foot. So a almost over 2 times change in the value of this tax deduction.
Wow. So
Yeah,
who does this impact? So it's a tax deduction. And if I just think about it personally, like I like tax deductions because I get to take them and lower what I owe Uncle
of
Sam.
course.
So who does this impact?
So there's two different folks who can qualify for Section 179D. The first are commercial building owners who are taxpayers. So if you, let's say, own your office and you renovate your office, you can claim the Section 179D deduction as the building owner. And that is done, if you're familiar with cost segregation, it's done almost very similarly as an accelerated depreciation deduction on your tax returns, allowing you to essentially accelerate those deductions you can capture into your first year.
Okay.
The other avenue is an interesting one. So in 2008, the economy was hurting. The AEC industry especially was impacted. And so Congress passed a notice through for Section 179D. And in that notice, it changed the program slightly for really designers, is what the tax code calls it, but someone creating technical specifications for government and now tax exempt buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So what that looks like, say a school district is going to build a new school. Because the school district is public and doesn't pay taxes, they can't take the tax deduction that's available. So they can now allocate that deduction to the folks who are a part of that construction project, depending on their design activities.
Wow. Okay. So they can almost pass that over to the for-profit entity to then take the deduction.
Yes, that's exactly right. So as you can imagine, for some of these companies that are working on primarily government work, there is a lot of tax benefit to be had.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, and when you say it's a tax deduction, again, I'm a simple-minded person. So that just lowers my tax bill, right? It's not a check I'm getting, correct?
That's correct. So a tax deduction would just reduce your taxable income that you owe that year. And if for any reason you can't use all of it, you can actually carry the value forward.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So and is it always the total square footage of my building multiplied by that dollar amount, or the area that is covered by the project I do?
It's so the tax code requires we look at the building as a whole.
Okay.
So it would be the entire conditioned building square footage multiplied by whatever dollar rate your energy analysis determines. So as you can imagine, if you are only impacting 50% of the building, you can actually claim the whole square footage, but it does help if you've impacted all of the building, because the more equipment that's renovated and increased in energy efficiency, the higher value you're likely to receive.
Got it. Got it. So when we look at impact, I mean, it's super obvious for owners of buildings, the impact is, especially for-profit organizations that own buildings, huge impact for them.
Yeah.
When we get into like our, and they're part of our audience, but other parts of our audience are designers, engineers like MEPs, or even companies that do install of building automation systems or HVAC equipment. So how does this impact them specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to the folks that are designing the projects, right, we're going to be looking again at those government-owned projects.
Okay.
And then now in 2023, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, we can look at tax-exempt projects as well. So any of those projects can be allocated to, and the tax code as a designer of the technical specifications on that project. But they further go on to list out that an architect, an engineer, a contractor, an energy services provider, any of these folks can be considered a designer. It's really based on the role and responsibilities they're carrying on the project. So typically for an architect or an engineer, that's very black and white. They're designing the systems that are going into the building. When it comes to a contractor, what we would be looking at is the type of contracts they have. Is it a design assist contract? Is it design build? Are they direct with the owner, helping to identify the scope of the problem, size new equipment to be put into place? That type of work is what we would be looking for as qualified work.
Okay. And that sounds like a lot of the work our audience does is that owner direct, come up with the solution,
Yeah.
select the equipment, select the system, design the sequence of operations and implement. So if they're doing that work, they qualify as the designer as part of this tax incentive, tax deduction.
Yeah, so actually, Julianne, there was just a court case ruling regarding Section 179D, in which there was an HVAC contractor who designed the sequence of operations in a public hospital. And the court ruled in their favor that they are considered a designer per Section 179D based on the design of that sequence of operations. So absolutely, especially in that case, I can say that they would be considered a designer.
Wow. So that opens up a world of opportunity for installing contractors, especially in the owner direct work that they do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If they're helping owners come up with solutions and in turn adding in maybe some energy efficient features, they could absolutely capture quite a bit of benefit for that. And you're providing a service to your building owner by helping them install energy efficient features into their system.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So when we get into the slightly more technical things, like what kind of work qualifies? And is it just projects we're about to go execute? Or like what about the jobs that we just finished, in the last 6 months of 2022 or last year sometime? Like what all
Sure.
qualifies?
So for project scope, the more that's impacted, the better. So new construction, I would always recommend. Now you're going to have other folks on those types of projects that also qualify as a designer. And we can go over it in a little bit later, but a government entity can allocate to more than one party.
Oh,
So
wow.
there is an option there. It's at their discretion, but there is an option there. But really anything that's impacting, the HVAC system is the most impactful for energy efficiency. So if you're renovating a building, the more equipment that you're replacing and installing, the more energy efficient features you're adding, like VFDs, CO2 sensors, building automation if it didn't have it before. All of that are good indicators that it could be an eligible project for 179D.
Okay. And does it have to be something that isn't done yet, or how does that work?
So we can look at both. So of course, if you've got some projects already on the books that could potentially qualify, now is a great time to start looking at what those projects are and how to approach those building owners about receiving the allocation. But we can also look back at past projects. You would place the deduction on the year that the project's construction was completed. So let's say you did a renovation at a school and it completed last year. You would then place it on last year's return. So we can look back 3 years, which is essentially the limit for which you can amend those returns.
Okay.
Yes.
So anything over in the last 3 tax years, I'm assuming?
Yes, as long as it's open to amend and you haven't passed your statute, you can still claim the deduction. You would just have to pay fees to amend your return.
So, and in the prep, we didn't talk about this, but I just got hit with a question that I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago was 2020, and some things happened in the world around that time.
Yeah.
And buildings were impacted quite a bit. Companies went in, had to reprogram, recommission, change sequence of operations for outside air, all sorts of stuff. And in a lot of those projects, there was a component of making buildings safer and more efficient at the same time. So are you saying that a company, let's say I'm running my own install business and I did projects in 2020, 2021 in that vein, can I go back and look at those and potentially work with those entities to get a tax benefit?
Yes, absolutely. The one caveat is that there must have been energy efficient commercial building property installed. So if the project was solely upgrading the sequence of operations, that wouldn't necessarily be a good fit for the program. But if you're adding in new controllers, maybe adding some additional HVAC units or fan coil units or anything like that, as long as there's some component of physical property going in, it's absolutely eligible.
That's fantastic. So getting into, the incentive itself, like how do we qualify? Like what is the process, right? Because we're talking at a high level, dollars and cents and projects, but we go do a project. So how do we make sure this all actually comes through?
Yeah, absolutely. So if let's say you have a project at a school and you have those design responsibilities, you want to go to a provider who provides Section 179D services, because there are a couple of things that you have to be able to claim this deduction on a return. 2 of them are a certification and a site visit from a third party professional. So a professional engineer like myself, who's not related to the project or the building owner, would have to do a site visit to visually verify that the equipment that you've shared with me is actually installed and operational in the building. And then we would build out an energy analysis to determine the annual energy savings percentage. And I would certify that deduction rate that is associated with that energy savings percentage. And those 2 pieces are really what you need to say that that part of the study is legitimate and ready to claim on a deduction. The other piece that's important is the allocation letter. So you have to have an allocation letter from the building owner to claim it on your return. And there are very specific requirements in the tax code for what should be included in that allocation letter. So those 3 things are really like what you absolutely have to have. And that's why it's very important to work with a provider who understands the tax code.
Okay, fantastic. Now, a lot of our audience, you said energy analysis of the building, right?
Sure.
A lot of the listeners, they know what you're talking about. They do it their way, or they have their tools. Can you share with us a little bit about what does that look like specific to qualifying for a 179D tax deduction?
Yes. So the analysis that we perform for Section 1790 probably is a little bit different than what most of your audience is doing right now. So we're going to build out what we call a baseline model, and that's based off of ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G. So I'm sure a lot of your audience knows what that is and is quite familiar. The interesting part is that right now, the IRS states that we should be using ASHRAE 90.1 2007 as our standard of measurement. So I assume a lot of your audience is looking at codes that are much further along. It kind of is an advantage though for the taxpayer, because even if your project let's say this year, isn't necessarily energy efficient minded, it's very likely that project's still more efficient than a 2007 standard because it is quite dated at this point.
Yeah, so you're almost alluding to the fact that even if a project might not qualify for, let's say, some of the higher hurdle utility incentives that are out there today, it could still qualify for this tax incentive because the standard is from all the way back in 07.
Yes, that's right. So because it's 2007, there is an advantage there. Now, it's not going to be 2007 forever. They actually just issued some guidance, I believe, starting in 2027. We're going to be moving to ASHRAE 90.1 2019. So it's a big jump, which means if you've got projects this year up to 2027 and those 3 years prior, let's look at them. Let's capitalize on that added benefit there.
Yeah, it sounds like if I was in the field selling to owners right now, I'd be talking about, let's get it done now. Let's get these things budgeted, get them done before this changes.
Absolutely.
Before we're held to a much higher standard.
Much higher standard, and it's going to have to be something that everybody adjusts to, because 2019, it's way more efficient than 2007. So there's going to have to be adjustments made by everybody, building owners and contractors included, to potentially qualify for this deduction.
That's wow. So let's see. We talked about more projects qualifying, benefits to the for-profit businesses, obviously, benefits to companies in the industry. So engineers who do design work, they can benefit.
Yes.
Installing contractors who do owner direct and they do the design, they can benefit.
Absolutely.
Have you seen in your experience, is there a certain segment of building characteristics, right? Does a building have to be a certain size or in a certain vertical where you see more success than others?
Yeah, great question. So typically, at least with the older version of Section 1790, so we're talking about projects completed in 2022 or earlier, pre-Inflation Reduction Act. The value there, the maximum value, is $1.80 per square foot with some inflation adjustments for the 2022 and 2021. With the smaller amount, typically a 20,000 square foot building or less probably needs to be discussed, because by the time you consider fees to amend as well as fees to have a provider build out the energy model, do the certification, it could end up being a wash at the end of the day. But with the new $5 per square foot rate from the Inflation Reduction Act, now it's a 15,000 square foot building could absolutely be of benefit. We're talking about significant savings. So it really depends on kind of the year that project was completed. But 20,000 square foot is a good rule of thumb.
Okay, great. And, I didn't ask earlier, but how much extra time does the, engaging a third party, doing the energy analysis, getting all the letters done and whatever, how much extra time does that add to my project? If I'm a sales guy and I'm putting the job together, what do I have to factor in here?
Yeah, great question. So really what our goal as a Section 1790 provider is to put as little work on your plate as the contractor or the government building owner or tax exempt building owner's plate as possible. So we're going to create everything for you, all of the documentation, all of the energy modeling. What we really need from the contracting side is we need a list of projects. So what I typically ask for is any projects that you've completed since, as we mentioned, 3 years ago, 2020, through the present, whatever you have on the books, I'll review those and help identify what look to be good candidates. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about those projects, making sure I understand the scope of services and gather some documentation, because we will need the construction drawings to build out those energy models. From there, we can handle just about everything else on the study. It depends on how you want to handle the outreach to the building owner. If you, as the contractor, want to facilitate that contact, then you can reach out and request that they sign the allocation letter. But our team is equipped to handle that as well, because we work with building owners all over the country, and we're very educated in the program. So if they've never participated, we can educate them about the program. We can help them understand what their role and responsibilities are, and ultimately get them in a position where they're able to participate. So that's kind of a preference for the contracting company as to which they'd like to do. The last component that needs any sort of assistance from our side is the site visit. That can be coordinated through the contractor if they still have access to the site, or we can coordinate it with the actual building owner as well. But the site visit is pretty straightforward. It typically takes an hour to identify the major equipment that's been installed, verify the client's work, and so on. So it's really not a huge time consumer.
That's good to know. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking about the building owner to start with, what advice would you have for the building owner operators listening to this episode right now? What should they be thinking about or doing next?
Sure. So if you're a building owner, one thing you want to do is look back at your past projects. Have you ever done a renovation on your facility, or did you newly construct it, several years back? You can still claim the 179D tax deduction if you have not yet already. So you can actually look back to when the program was first enacted, which was in 2005. So any projects January 1st, 2006 to the present are eligible. Now, obviously, the more recent, the better, because the equipment's going to be more efficient. The technologies are just better, but you can go back and claim that benefit. So that's something to look at. The second piece of advice I'd have is, if you're planning or thinking about any projects, get a provider in as fast as possible. They can help educate you on, what you could expect to receive for certain projects, what types of equipment would be installed that would be eligible for Section 179D. There's also a new component that was introduced from the Inflation Reduction Act for prevailing wages and apprenticeship requirements. Mm-hmm. Those must be met to achieve the $5 per square foot. So it's important to know what those are and be able to implement them in your project, so that at the end, you're already eligible to receive that maximum value.
So can we peel back the onion a little bit on that? Because that's very
Sure.
interesting, the apprenticeship and prevailing wage requirements.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk more about that? What is in the law now?
Yes. So this is brand new. Like I said, the Inflation Reduction Act is what introduced these requirements, and it's actually a requirement on several other tax incentives as well. What's required for a project is that for the prevailing wages, all laborers and mechanics should be paid prevailing wages based on the locality of that building. Mm-hmm. So that would be a requirement on a project, whether it be the private tax-paying commercial building owner or the designers on a government or tax-exempt project. And then the second piece is the apprenticeship requirements. So there are certain percentages based on the year of when construction is occurring that you need to achieve in apprenticeship hours. So I believe currently it's 10% of your total labor hours should be with apprentices.
Okay, gotcha. So let me make sure I repeat back, because like I said earlier, I'm just a simple sales guy in all actuality in this industry. Yes. And some folks who know me might even accuse me of not paying close enough attention. So whether it's public or private building, prevailing wage applies.
Yes, if you would like to achieve the $5 per square foot. If you don't achieve the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, You'll still be able to claim a 1790 deduction. It's just going to be reduced down to a maximum of a dollar per square foot.
Okay, gotcha. So to maximize, I want to do the project with prevailing wages.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then on the apprenticeship side, so you said 10% of labor. So if we're doing a project that's got a couple of different trades in there, right? Is it 10% of each trade is measured, or is it 10% total across the board?
It's funny you ask this, Julian, because a lot of people have a lot of questions about these new requirements. And the IRS issued some guidance late last year that helped put together some of the answers for this, but there's still some gray zone in there. From what I can see, it's the total labor hours on the project. So it wouldn't matter where that labor was coming from, as long as 10% is from the apprenticeship. You should meet the requirements. Now, there's a couple of things to note about this. Number one, if your construction project is already started and you're thinking, well, how am I supposed to meet this now? I didn't know about these requirements. As long as that construction project started before the end of January, you're going to be grandfathered into the higher rate. So the IRS, they're seeing that obviously it's going to be difficult in a construction project that's already occurring. The other piece is there is a clause for good faith effort. So if on the project, let's say you're registering with approved apprenticeship programs and the programs aren't replying back to you in a certain amount of time, or they're denying your request to have apprentices on your project, the IRS says as long as you're making a good faith effort to actually participate, then they will allow you to pursue that maximum value. So they understand this isn't a perfect program, and I do expect that there probably will be more guidance issued this year.
Okay. But as of right now, 10% of all labor. It's not 10% of the HVAC guy, mechanics, and 10% of the electricians, and 10% of the controls guys. It's not that granular yet.
Not that I have seen.
Okay. And as long as if I am a business owner trying my hardest to get apprentices on this job and I'm just striking out, good faith effort, you and an organization like yours can help me make sure that we still maximize that deduction.
Yes, that's absolutely right. What I recommend is document that you are actually making these efforts. But yes, they have included that clause in there. So they acknowledge that it's not a perfect program.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the advice, so we had covered building owners. I'm thinking about the folks who are technicians, salespeople, dispatcher types, who listen to our podcast. They are the closest to the customer, right? They're the closest to the operators and who work for these building owners. What should these techs and salespeople, the folks close to the customer, if you will, what should they be doing and what should they be saying now?
Yeah, I think the first thing to ask, especially with your government building owners, is do you participate in the program? Have you heard of this? Because the sooner we can start those conversations in a project, the better. So if they haven't heard of the program, you can connect them with hopefully a provider that you're working with who can educate them on the program and help them understand what it is that they would be participating in, so that as soon as the project's done, you can hopefully pursue it for yourself. For tax-exempt building owners, this is going to be interesting because this program is all new to them this year. So that education component, I expect to be something that every single tax-exempt building owner is going to need. So again, approaching them right away, asking them if they know of the program, are they willing to participate? Could you connect them with a provider that you trust so that they can learn about it is really important. You also need to understand what it is if they have any sort of requirements for participating. So do they only allocate to certain entities? That's good to know right up front. Is there anything that they would be looking for in return? The IRS, there's no law that says they can't ask for anything. The IRS issued some guidance a few years back saying it wasn't the intent of the program, but there are ways for everybody to really come out as a winner in this. Maybe they want some extended warranties. Maybe they would like you to add in some extra energy efficient options into the project. In some cases, I've seen them ask for truly just a monetary donation. So understanding what it is that they would want in exchange for allocating is good.
Okay, awesome. Well, kind of along those lines, you got into a little bit of what the answer would be for the next question. So if I'm the leader of a business that executes work, right?
Yeah.
HVAC, building automation, etc. I lead this business. I have employees who are looking to me for direction. What
Mm-hmm.
should I be doing around this topic?
Sure. So I think one of the most important pieces, especially for a contractor, is if you have a project that you believe is eligible, you're performing those design activities. Number one, the IRS issued guidance last summer saying one of the first places they're going to look is in your contract language. Is there anything in there that states that you are going to be responsible for design activities? So as a leader of an organization, if your team is taking that on, make sure that language is captured in the contract, that you will be designing the sequence of operations or whatever that might be, because that's something that the IRS will look at and say, all right, it's here, it's contractually agreed upon by both parties, like they meet the designer requirements. The second piece I would say is for any design activities that happen on the project, capture that documentation and save it somewhere. So if you're running calculations to size equipment, save that calculation sheet. I know a lot of folks just do it, kind of back of the napkin. Make sure you scan it in and save it so that they can see you're actually performing those design duties, so that if there are ever any questions on the back end, it's very simple and straightforward to answer them and make sure that you are compliant with the code.
And you stole one of my favorite phrases to use when I'd be selling. It's like back of the napkin.
Back of the napkin.
Back of the napkin.
That's right.
This will come out to about 110,000. How's that feel? So capturing all that information, that's great. The contract. Yep. So if my team, so I'm a contractor, my team is selecting the equipment, articulating that in the proposal and the contract document that we did the equipment selection. If we're installing maybe a new front end and designing the graphics and sequences of operations and everything else, articulating it that way, critical step in our process is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can articulate in the contract, we are going to be responsible for designing the sequence of operations or whatever it might be in that project, that absolutely is a document that I expect the IRS to take a look at and say, okay, they took that responsibility and therefore they have the qualifications for being a designer on the project.
And, whatever, let's just say Bob, who does all my calculations for me, on the back of a napkin, I have to take a picture of that napkin and email it so we have documentation that we did that work.
Yes, I mean, it sounds silly, but the more documentation, the better. That's what the IRS wants to see when they're taking a look. Let's say they're reviewing a Section 1790 study. What documentation do you have to support that they had those technical specification creation activities? And if you can say, like, look, here's the 25 napkins with all of the calculations, they're going to be much more comfortable with that than if you say, well, we did it, but we just didn't save any of the information that we did because it was all done by hand and very casually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thinking about another part of our audience, the manufacturers, right? The folks at those organizations that are fantastic organizations that make great products. What role do they play supporting their contracting community and the folks who are installing these products on their behalf? Is there a role that they play in helping folks, whether it's the contractor or the building owners, make these benefits a reality?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for manufacturers, it again depends on the type of responsibilities they're taking on. So, I think of some of the controls contractors that I've worked with. Sometimes they dabble into the design part of the project where they are, providing that sequence of operations, helping to set up the control system so that it's operating efficiently. In that case, the manufacturer might even have a claim to it. Again, based on the activities. Now, let's say they don't take on those types of responsibilities. helping your contractor that you're working with design the system, it would really be in direct support of them being able to claim the Section 1790 deduction. But you might have some conversations of, if we assist you with this, or if we kind of give this part to you, like, could we work on a reduced contract fee or something of that nature, so that they're both sharing in the benefit. It really becomes a business decision between the two parties as to how they want to share that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and when they're working with a for-profit building owner, that building owner is going to take that benefit, but the contractor, the manufacturer, they get the benefit of another project,
Yes.
increasing their install base, more product out there in the world.
Yes.
With government and nonprofit entities, those entities, if I remember you saying this, correct me if I'm wrong, they could allocate that benefit between the two of them. And you're saying it's a business decision, and it really does come down to design work, right? Who's making those calls to make this building and this project the most energy efficient possible?
That's right. So in the case of, again, the government owner can only allocate to a qualified designer. So they can't just pick somebody out of the blue as to who they'd like to allocate to. But let's say that both entities end up having design responsibilities. Then the government owner can allocate to whomever they like. If they want to do it to one person, the allocation to one person, great. If they want to split it amongst multiple parties, they can do that as well. But what I see being very successful, let's say you are working with another firm and they've done design activities, working together to determine how you'd like to share that and presenting that to the building owner as, listen, we've already talked this out, we both qualify, we'd like to share it evenly. It takes the responsibility of the building owner having to choose who to allocate it to. So I see a lot of success in that, so that building owners don't feel like they're providing any sort of favoritism.
Yeah. And if there's an engineer, then the engineer does all the design work, so then they'll get the benefit.
Yes. Typically, in design build projects, occasionally a contractor will come in and also provide some sort of specialty design, in which case they could, again, share it. But it is the government building owner's choice to allocate it to the person primarily responsible, which in that case would be the engineer.
Got it. I mean, it sounds like, whether, no matter what role you're in or what organization your role plays, there's a way for all of us to get along and work together to make more projects happen and find those win-wins for everybody.
Absolutely. I talk with contractors and designers all the time about their projects. Occasionally, they don't have enough government projects or tax exempt projects to pursue for themselves. But what I always tell them is, this is such a great way to strengthen relationships with your private building owners, because you can let them know about a program that they maybe don't know about. They can capture some benefit in their first tax year after that project's completed. And hopefully, if they have more projects down the line, they're going to call you first. So there's just so many opportunities for everybody to walk away a winner.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a relationship driven business. So that's a great point.
Yes.
So I have to ask, because I don't know what I don't know.
Sure.
What questions didn't I ask you, but should have?
Ooh, good question. Let me think. What questions haven't you asked? I mean, we've covered quite a bit of the program. The biggest thing to note is that the program changes the way it's calculated pre-2022 and post-2022. So we talked about the maximum values of $1.80 per square foot from the prior program. The way Section 1790 was shaped before, you could receive that maximum $1.80 per square foot, or you can receive a partial deduction at 60 cents per square foot. And the partial deductions, what you would look at is each system individually. So if you looked at, let's say, the HVAC system, it would only need to achieve a 15% energy threshold, and you could receive 60 cents. So you still get some value there. That is very different now than the new program. They wiped out those partial deductions, and now it's simply on a sliding scale. So the minimum percentage that you have to achieve for any projects completed in 2023 and on is 25%. And you're going to look at all the systems as a whole. So we'll model that, see where that lands. Every percentage point you get from there. So 25% with $2.50 as the rate. Every percentage point there, you get an additional 10 cents up to the $5 per square foot.
Okay. And that's 25% compared to the 2007 standard.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
Yes.
All right. Very cool. Well, let's ask you, for everyone who's listening, for their benefit, where can the audience find you if there's more questions?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. So like I said, I work at Calvetti Ferguson. You can always send me an email at Massey, Massey, at calvettiferguson.com. And I'll share that with Julian if you'd like to reach out and get that email. I'm also on LinkedIn. Abby Massey, Massey. I'm a PE, so you'll see that on the back of my name. So feel free, reach out to me via email. You can reach out to me via LinkedIn. You can also look at our website. We have a lot of articles and information posted about Section 179D and other tax incentives. And we typically have a form at the bottom. You can fill out your information and it'll shoot right to me. I'll give you a call probably in the next day.
Abby, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with our audience. We really appreciate it. I mean, and you did so in such a way that even I understood it. So I really thank you for that, because you could have really made me look foolish. So we appreciate everything you've done here. And thank you for taking the time with us.
Yeah, thanks, Julian, for having me on. If anybody has any questions, I'm here to help.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed Julian and Abby's interview. I enjoyed it. I'm always looking forward to learning more and more about the options that are available to us to help our customers make buildings smarter, and to help the industry be able to retrofit a lot of these legacy buildings. So that being said, as always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Go to podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/414. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/414. I had to think about that for a second. A lot of dots. But my hope is you'll go there. You will connect with Abby and Julian. Feel free to pick their brains on this topic. And I'll see you all on the next podcast. Thanks a ton. Take care.